It was a warm evening when Rajesh boarded the train at Howrah station, weary from a long day's work. The train to Begunkodar was far from packed, and the dimly lit cabin gave off an eerie, abandoned feeling. Rajesh had heard strange rumors about the station, ghost stories told by locals, but he dismissed them as superstitions. He had no reason to believe in the paranormal, especially not on a short business trip. As the train rattled on through the countryside, the air outside grew dense with mist, and the faint sound of distant whistles seemed to stretch longer than usual, echoing in the silence of the night. The train passed through small villages, each one darker than the last, until the landscape became barren. There was a chill in the air, but Rajesh wasn't bothered. He sat back in his seat trying to relax, but something felt off. The silence in the train was unnerving, and there was a heaviness in the air, as though something was about to happen. The only sound was the rhythmic chugging of the train wheels. Suddenly the train slowed down. The brakes screeched as the dim lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the cabin. Rajesh glanced out the window and saw nothing but a thick blanket of fog. The conductor appeared at his seat, his face pale and grim. "We'll be stopping at Begunkodar shortly," he muttered before walking away, leaving Rajesh feeling even more uneasy. As the train came to a halt at the platform of Begunkodar, Rajesh felt a strange pull in his chest. The station looked deserted, save for a lone figure standing by the tracks, motionless. The mist swirled around them, almost as if it had a life of its own. Rajesh's heart began to race, and a sinking feeling crept into his stomach. He had no choice but to step off the train and into the unknown. Rajesh's boots crunched on the gravel as he stepped onto the platform, the mist wrapping around him like a shroud. The station was eerily silent. No station master, no passengers, just the faint sound of wind rustling the trees in the distance. The air was thick with a strange, heavy quality, and Rajesh couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. He looked around but saw no sign of life. The figure he had seen earlier had disappeared. A flickering light above him cast long shadows, adding to the station's ghostly appearance. The platform stretched endlessly, like a tunnel leading nowhere. Rajesh reached for his phone to check the time, but the screen remained blank. It was as if the station was frozen in time. He shook his head, trying to rationalize the situation. "It's just an old station," he muttered to himself. But deep down, he knew that there was something terribly wrong. A low whistle echoed through the fog, sending chills down his spine. Rajesh turned around, but there was no train in sight. The sound seemed to come from nowhere, reverberating off the abandoned platform walls. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but he was trapped. There was no other train for miles, and no one had mentioned any delay. The faint sound of footsteps broke the silence behind him. He spun around, heart pounding in his chest. There was a figure approaching from the darkness, tall, gaunt, and with a face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The stranger moved toward him with an unnatural fluidity, his gait almost gliding across the ground. Rajesh froze, unable to move as the figure got closer. And then, without warning, the figure vanished into the mist, leaving Rajesh standing alone in the emptiness. Rajesh hurried into the small, crumbling station building, hoping to find someone who could explain what was going on. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit room cluttered with dusty old furniture. A few faded posters of trains adorned the walls, their colors long since faded. At the far end of the room, an old man sat behind a desk, his eyes wide and unblinking as if he hadn't slept in years. "Can I help you?" the man's voice cracked, sending a jolt of unease through Rajesh. The station master looked at him with an odd intensity, his gaze almost too piercing. "I'm looking for a way out of here," Rajesh said, trying to sound calm despite the growing dread in his chest. "What's going on?" "The train just stopped." The old man leaned forward, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. "This station, it's cursed," he whispered. "You've heard the stories, haven't you?" Rajesh shook his head, but the man continued. "Begunkodar has a history. It was once a bustling station, but now it's a place where time gets lost. The spirits of the dead wander here, trapped in an endless loop. Once you step off that train, you may never leave." Rajesh's heart skipped a beat as the weight of the words settled on him. He had heard nothing of this before, but the unease he felt now seemed to make the old man's words ring true. The station master leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The train you came on, it never leaves Begunkodar. It's part of the curse." Rajesh felt his blood run cold. "Get out while you still can, or you'll be trapped here forever." Rajesh stumbled backward, his mind racing. The station master's words echoed in his ears, and his surroundings seemed to close in on him. He had to leave. He had to find a way to escape this cursed place. But how? There was no train, no way out. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and Rajesh turned toward the door, his breath coming in shallow gasps. As he stepped outside, the mist had thickened even further, swallowing the platform in an impenetrable shroud. The silence was deafening, yet Rajesh could feel a presence lurking just out of sight. A faint rustling sound came from the far end of the platform, and Rajesh's heart began to race. Was it the figure he had seen earlier, or something far worse? Suddenly, A cold hand brushed against his shoulder. He whipped around, but there was nothing there. His body went rigid with fear, his mind struggling to comprehend the impossible. The temperature had dropped drastically, and Rajesh could see his breath in the air. His surroundings had begun to warp, distorting as though reality itself was bending. He could hear faint whispers like voices from a distant past, murmuring his name. Rajesh's vision blurred, and the platform seemed to stretch impossibly far in front of him. In a panic, he started running, his footsteps echoing loudly in the thick fog. He ran and ran, but no matter how far he went, the platform never seemed to end. It was as if he was trapped in an endless loop. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, and he felt the cold fingers of fear tighten around him. Rajesh's legs burned with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop running. The fog clung to his skin like a suffocating blanket, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. He could barely make out shapes in the mist, figures that moved just beyond his reach. They were too far to see clearly, but he could feel their presence, their eyes watching him, tracking his every step. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of a train whistle pierced the air. Rajesh froze, his heart skipping a beat. The sound was unmistakable, but when he turned to look, there was no train in sight. The whistle echoed again, closer this time, and then the ground beneath him trembled. The phantom train was coming, but it was not a train he could see. It was a force, a presence, an ancient evil that had taken the form of the very train that had brought him here. The tracks ahead of him seemed to shimmer in the mist, and Rajesh stumbled forward, trying to find something, anything, that could explain the bizarre events unfolding before him. The train whistle came again, louder this time, accompanied by the screeching sound of brakes. He could hear the thud of footsteps behind him, and when he turned, he saw nothing. Yet, the sound continued to grow louder, as if the train were speeding toward him. A flash of light illuminated the tracks in the distance, and Rajesh screamed. The train was here, too fast, too close. He tried to move, to step out of the way, but his legs wouldn't respond. The train was upon him now, and Rajesh could feel its cold, malevolent presence closing in. The train sped past him, its black, shadowy form blurring in the fog. Rajesh tried to scream, but his voice was lost in the sound of the train's deafening roar. The ground beneath him seemed to ripple like water, and he felt himself being pulled toward the tracks. His vision blurred as the world around him twisted, the station fading in and out like a nightmare. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The whispers had returned, now louder than ever, filling his ears with chilling words that made no sense. His mind was unraveling. Was he dreaming? Had he lost his sanity? No, this was real, too real. The horrors of Begunkodar were consuming him, and he knew he had no escape. In the distance, the figure of the station master appeared again. His face twisted in a grotesque grin. "You should have left when you had the chance," he said. His voice like a distant echo, fading in and out. "Now you are one of them, trapped forever in the loop." The words resonated in Rajesh's mind, a cold truth that he couldn't deny. Rajesh tried to stand, but his legs were like jelly beneath him. The world around him seemed to stretch and contort, like a warped painting. He could see shadows moving, flickering at the edge of his vision. The whispers grew louder, the voices now frantic, calling his name in a language he didn't understand. The station master's figure was closer now, his body slowly melting into the mist. Rajesh reached out, desperate to ask for help, but the man vanished again, leaving only a trail of cold air behind him. Rajesh stumbled back, his breath ragged as the shadows closed in on him. He could feel something or someone watching him from the mist, something dark and malevolent, its eyes burning into him. The shadows began to take shape, forming the silhouettes of people. They were all standing in a row, their faces blank and lifeless, their eyes staring at him with cold indifference. They were the lost souls, the ones who had come before him. And now, it was his turn to join them. Rajesh tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. He tried to run, but his body was frozen, held in place by the shadows that surrounded him. The whispers had become a deafening roar, drowning out all other sounds. And then, as if the fog itself had consumed him, everything went dark. Rajesh woke up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He was still at Begunkodar, still on the platform, but the station was different now. It was older, more decrepit. The mist was thicker, suffocating. The train was gone. There were no tracks, no platform, just the endless void of the night. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy, as though it no longer belonged to him. His fingers brushed against the ground, feeling the cold earth beneath him. The station master's words echoed in his mind again, trapped forever in the loop. He realized, with a sickening certainty, that this wasn't a dream. This wasn't some passing nightmare. This was his reality now. He was trapped in Begunkodar, caught in the eternal cycle of terror. There was no escape, no way out. He could feel the shadows closing in once more, pressing against his skin like cold hands. The whispers were back, louder than ever. And then in the distance, he saw it. Another train coming closer, its lights flashing in the mist. The train's lights cut through the fog, blinding Rajesh with their intensity. He felt his body trembling uncontrollably, an icy cold creeping into his bones. The sound of the train grew louder, a deafening roar that seemed to echo from all directions. He knew it was coming for him. He could feel it in every fiber of his being. It was as if the train itself was alive, its wheels scraping against his sanity, pulling him back into the nightmare. As the train drew closer, Rajesh could see it more clearly. It was the same train that had brought him here, the same ghostly presence that had started everything. The doors of the train swung open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. It beckoned him, a hollow promise of escape or maybe another chapter in his torment. His legs moved against his will, compelled to step forward, as though some unseen force was guiding him toward the inevitable. Rajesh tried to resist, tried to stop himself, but it was useless. His body moved on its own, dragging him toward the train with an unnatural force. The whispering voices surrounded him, pressing against his ears, pulling him into the same agonizing loop. He could see the faces of those who had come before him, trapped souls, their eyes hollow, their expressions vacant, their bodies swaying gently as if carried by the train's eternal motion. The train's door loomed closer, and with it, a promise that Rajesh knew deep down was not salvation. It was another form of captivity, another way for the horrors of Begunkodar to claim him forever. His hands reached out involuntarily, grasping the cold metal of the train's doorframe. As he stepped inside, he felt the weight of eternity press against him. The train doors slammed shut behind him, and the darkness engulfed him once more. Rajesh's eyes snapped open, but he couldn't tell if he was awake or still dreaming. He was back on the platform. The fog had thickened again, and the train was gone. He could hear the distant echo of its whistle, the sound that had haunted him since the moment he arrived. The station was silent, but the air was heavier, colder, as though it too was aware of the curse that had wrapped itself around this place. He stood there, frozen, unable to move. The familiar whispers began again, but this time they were not in the distance. They were all around him, pressing against his skin, seeping into his mind. Trapped. Forever. The words felt like they were being carved into his soul, each syllable a fresh wound. The station master's face appeared in front of him, his eyes hollow and dead. "You're one of us now," the old man said, his voice as hollow as the space around them. "Begunkodar takes what it needs, and now it needs you. Forever." Rajesh wanted to scream, to fight back, but the words wouldn't come. He was no longer in control. He could feel the fog closing in again, wrapping around his body, suffocating him. The platform was beginning to fade, the edges of his vision blurring, until there was nothing but the darkness that had consumed him before. In the distance, the train's whistle sounded again, louder this time. Rajesh could feel it, feel the pull as the shadows wrapped themselves around him. This was his fate now, to live in the endless cycle of terror that Begunkodar had crafted. There was no escape, no end. The train would come for him again, and every time he would step aboard, only to be trapped in the same nightmare once more. And so, as the train approached, Rajesh realized that he was no longer a visitor in this cursed place. He was a part of it now, a lost soul, forever condemned to haunt Begunkodar Railway Station. The cycle would never end.